Well, it's my honor this morning to introduce to you, and you probably already met him, Corbin. Bo is our pastoral resident at the Front Church. And if you guys don't know, my wife had a baby less than 2 weeks ago. So last week we had a pinch hitter. This week we have a pinch hitter. I'm super pumped for Bo. I believe he has a word for our community. But I just wanted to take a moment, not a long moment, don't worry, before Bo gets into his message to just honor my brother. You guys don't see a lot of what Bo does, but Bo picks up the trailer, which is the earliest job for our Sunday morning setup crew every single Sunday morning and make sure it's here and ready to go. Bo is someone who's always serving. I tell a lot of friends when I'm introducing Bo, and I tell him and Teresa this too, I just feel like they are some of the best lovers of people I know. I don't know people who love people much better than Bo and Teresa. So I'm thankful for you guys. I love you. I'm pumped for the word you have for us. So give it up for Bo this morning.
All right. Well, I appreciate that, man. And thanks, Cam and the band, for leading us in a time of worship. You guys did great. Like Nate said, my name's Bo, and I am just honored to be up here this morning with you guys and worshiping with you. If you guys were here last week, you heard our guest speaker, David Henderson, and it was a great message. And then if you were here again this week, you probably saw me, and you're like, is that David who just spent a week up in the mountains, didn't shave, and ate a lot of food? Close, but we are two separate people, so sorry for the confusion. I'm glad to be here with you guys. Quick story about me. So my wife, Teresa, is sitting right there. And we've been married for 5 years, a little over 5 years. And when I proposed to her, when we were back in Oklahoma, there's that picture of that moment there, I wanted to surprise her, right? So I had this planned out where her friend was in on it. She got all dressed up and was going to go down to Oklahoma City for a nice fancy dinner date with the girls, I guess. And there's this rustic wedding venue that unbeknownst to her, she was going to veer off and be dropped off at, had it all decorated, and then I was going to sing her a song on the guitar. Now, I'm not a good singer. I'm not great at guitar. And it wasn't just one song, I lied. I was going to play her 5 songs. Now, if you're married and you've been through that whole proposal thing, like, it's nerve-wracking for both sides, right? Like, for the guy, why 5 songs? Why 1 song? And for the girl, like, she, at this point, right, she knows it's a proposal. And she's sitting through 5 songs. Guys, don't do that. Please don't do that. But it gets better. So one of the songs I was going to play for her is called Remember When by Alan Jackson. It's just a song that kind of walks through the little moments of life together, looking back. And the chorus just repeats this refrain, remember when. Ironically, with all the nerves of the moment, that's all I could remember of the song. And so about 15 times I said, remember when? And it was pretty ironic. And so that's a little bit about me. And she said yes, obviously. I don't even know if I made it through 5 songs or not. But anyways, in all seriousness, though, like, remembering is a really important idea in our culture. Like wedding vows, for example, like we remember those on our anniversaries, and it kind of reorients how we live our lives. If you think about like vacations you take, times where like your kid is born, you take pictures because you want to look back later on life and remember those moments that mean a lot to you. And so we take pictures and videos. As a society and as a culture, and even cross-culturally, memorials play a big part in us as a people remembering. And so we've got a picture up there, and that's the Oklahoma City bombing memorial. And so memorials like this, right, they do a couple things. Like, one thing, we set those up to not repeat history that we don't want to repeat as a people. In this case, domestic terrorism. Like, we set that up as, may we never do that again. But it also commemorates the people whose lives were lost. And so memorials kind of draw us together as a people to remember, to remember people and to remember events. So remembering is important. That's why diseases that attack memory are so tragic. And it's why remembering people and having someone remember you feels so good. Because remembering is important. And you see, it's not just important for our culture. It was important too in the Israelites' day. So in the Old Testament, God's people, the people of Israel, if you read, you'll find that this refrain, remember, is told to them. Not just told, but it's like one of the most important commandments to the people of God. The leaders of Israel and God himself commands his people over and over again to remember. Remember. And so this morning we're going to take a look together. We're going to walk through a couple texts and see what they were supposed to remember and why that was so critical for who they are. So I'll pray for us and then we'll get started. God, may you open our ears and our hearts to you this morning. God, may we hear what you would have to say through your word. God, humble us and help us to remember what you would have us remember, God. In your name we pray. Amen. All right, so prayer in the Old Testament, it's called the Shema, right? And it goes, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength." Now, Shema just means to hear or to listen. So you see that first part of that prayer, "Hear, O Israel." And this can be found in the book of Deuteronomy. And so if you guys want to open up, the book of Deuteronomy is, well, if you can see my Bible, it's towards the first part of the Old Testament. So it's the fifth book, and it's in the Pentateuch, which is a fancy word. It just means 5 books. So the beginning-ish of the Old Testament in Deuteronomy, which just means second instruction, we have this speech here that we're going to look at. And so what happens here is Moses, the great leader of Israel at that time, has walked with this people that God called out for 40 years through the desert. And they've come to this place called Moab. We've got kind of a picture of what that looks like today. But Moab, it's not southern Utah, not a national park. You're not going to go mountain biking in Israel there. But so they've gathered this people, the people of God, and they've come to this place of Moab. And so here, after following God for 40 years, their leader has this great instruction for them. Something that God has told him to say to his people to remember. Okay, we're back. So it's this final instruction to this people of God. And so we're going to pick it up in Deuteronomy chapter 6, kind of the beginning of this great speech to the people of God, verses 1 through 3. You can either follow along on the screen. We'll have the text up there, or you can turn on or open your Bibles and follow along there. So I'll begin in 6, verse 1. It says, "These are the commands, decrees, and laws the Lord your God directed me to teach you to observe in the land that you are crossing the Jordan to possess, so that you, your children, and their children after them may fear the Lord your God as long as you live, by keeping all his decrees and commands that I give you, and so that you may enjoy a long life." Right, so Moses comes up and he says, these things I'm about to tell you, remember them. I want you to hear them and keep them in your heart. Fear the Lord. Listen to what he has to say. And then we see this Shema, this prayer that we mentioned. "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the doorframes of your houses and on your gates." And then later in verse 12, he says, "Be careful that you do not forget your Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt, the land of slavery." And so he's saying, listen, hear these instructions. Tell them to your kids. Write them on your doorposts. Anything you can do, remember this. Because they're going to lead to life. Choose life by remembering what God is about to tell you. And you can almost hear the passion or the intensity in Moses' voice, right? It's like he's reaching for these things to tell them to remember. And I wonder in part if the passion or the pleading in his voice is because he himself actually doesn't get to go into this land that the people of God are about to go into. So you see, I had mentioned that for 40 years he had been with the people of Israel. Well, what happened, so God had called this man earlier in the Old Testament, this man named Abraham. And he basically said to him, I'm going to be your God, follow me. And so throughout the Old Testament, we see God being faithful and providing for Abraham, promising to make him a great land, have a lot of descendants, and so that his people will be great. He was going to bless him and bless the world through him. And so a lot of the Old Testament is the story of God being faithful to his people. And so he does make Abraham and his descendants great. They have a lot of people, and they end up in this land of Egypt. And the Pharaoh, the leader of Egypt, the king of Egypt, is afraid because this people have become so numerous, he thinks they're a threat to him. And so what does he do? He oppresses them and makes them slaves. And so now this people of God is being oppressed and in slavery in Egypt. And so what does God do? He raises up a leader, this Moses that we've been talking about. And so miracle after miracle, God proves himself to be greater and more powerful than this king of Egypt, and he delivers his people from the Egyptians. It's actually the first time we see the word redeemed. He literally purchased his people out of slavery and delivered them. He parted the Red Sea. If you've heard that story, that's where that happens. And so this great event called the Exodus, where God delivers his people, and then he leads them to this mountain. It's called Mount Sinai, and here God reveals himself to his people of what to expect from him. And now this was like a really gracious thing to do back then, and we don't catch it all the time because the other quote-unquote gods that the other people around followed, like they were arbitrary. Like, did we make God mad or not? What does he expect of us? But this God, the God of Israel, revealed himself to his people. He chose them because he loved them, and then he was gracious enough to tell them, this is how to live with me. This is what the relationship looks like. And then he's going to fulfill his promise. He's going to keep his promise to give them this land that pretty much has anything you could ever want. But the problem is, God's people didn't follow him. They rebelled and they were hard-hearted and they went their own way. And so as a result, they had to wander in this desert, this wilderness for 40 years. And so after all this time, God testing them in the desert, this is where we get to the book of Deuteronomy, or the second instruction, is again, they're on the cusp of this promised land. But now their leader Moses, because he forgot God in the wilderness, doesn't get to enter in. And so you can hear the pleading and the history of this relationship where Moses is like, remember this time. Remember who your God is and what he has for you. And so it's not going to be on the screen, but if we were to take a survey of the rest of the book of Deuteronomy, this refrain, remember, gets repeated over and over again. So I'll just kind of fire off some verses here. He says, remember that you were slaves in Egypt and that the Lord your God brought you out. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt and the Lord your God redeemed you. Remember how the Lord your God, all the way in the wilderness for 40 years, led you to humble you and test you to see what was in your heart. Remember this and never forget how you aroused the anger of the Lord. From the day you left Egypt until you arrived here, you have been rebellious against the Lord. Remember the days of old. And remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you the ability to produce wealth, and so confirms his promise to you. See, throughout the book, the words remember, listen, obey, and hear, over 20 times each, they're in the book. So you can see, like, if you read it through, Moses is trying to hammer home something. God's hammering home, like, remember who you are, remember who I am. And remembering here is sort of like wedding vows or like a memorial. Like, it's not just a passive reminiscing. It's more than just sitting on your front porch with your grandparents or your parents and talking about the good old days and remembering all the things that life has held. But it's a reorienting. our lives around something. One commentator has this definition of the idea of remembering in the Old Testament. He says, Israel's commitments are to be an expression of love and loyalty, love expressed in joyful obedience. Remembering means to love and obey. Reminds us of that prayer we read, right? Like, hear, O Israel, hear and remember, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. When I think about this idea of reorienting or recalibrating our lives based on something, an analogy comes to mind of like parents who send their kids off to school, right? Either as like a kindergartner for the first time or sending your kids off to college maybe after raising them. Now, I can imagine as a parent, right, you've spent your whole life, like literally every part of you pouring into raising this kid. And you know that when you let them go, it's going to be harder than they could ever imagine. You've done all you can, but there's no way to prepare them for what life is going to hold. Life gets hard. It's unpredictable. There's going to be heartbreak that you're not going to be able to be there for yourself. And so you tell them, like, son, remember what I've told you. Daughter, remember who we raised you to be. Don't forget. And yet, as like a parent, you do that knowing full well, like there's going to be times they forget you. There's going to be times they probably don't want anything to do with you, or at least they get into trouble and you're not going to be able to be there for them. And yet you still tell them, like, remember. And I can't help but think, like, there's a little bit of that going on with Moses and the people of God here, like, pleading, like, remember, son, remember, daughter, who you are, and live accordingly. There's this quote by this musician, Andrew Peterson. He wrote this song for his boys. He was growing up, and it kind of just says the same thing, but it says, when I look at you, boy, I can see the road that lies ahead. I can see the love and the sorrow, bright fields of joy, dark nights awake in a stormy bed, and I know you'll be scared when you take up the cross, and I know it'll hurt because I know what it costs. Go back to the ancient paths, lash your heart to the ancient mast, and hold on, boy, whatever you do, to the hope that's taken hold of you, and you'll find your way back home. But Israel's story throughout the rest of the Old Testament isn't a story of remembering, actually. It's a story of forgetting. Over and over and over again, they forget who God is, and they forget who they are. Constantly failing and constantly getting into messes. And you see, they weren't told to remember like a tradition. They weren't told to remember some national heritage. And they also actually weren't told to remember that God chose them because they were like special and better than all the other peoples around them. Actually, God says, like, I chose you because I love you. And through you, I want to bless all the other worlds, for all the other nations for my glory. So remember that. And if we're honest, like the story of forgetting, like that's our story too, I think. Like if you look back throughout your life about everything that's happened, all the decisions you've made, and if you're really honest with yourself, like, have you remembered God or have you forgotten him? I think if I were to write like a biography, an autobiography, or a memoir, and I were truly honest about myself, like my story would be a story of forgetting and not remembering. Over and over and over again, forgetting who my God is and who I am. But just like Israel, just like their Exodus event, like we have been redeemed by a God who doesn't forget. You see, it was God who rescued them out of Egypt. He heard their cry when they had rebelled, and he redeemed them. When he gave them the instruction at Mount Sinai and they rebelled, like he remembered his people and came towards them. And in the wilderness, when they constantly complained and wanted to go back to slavery, living in this land, in this desert between the land of slavery and the land of promise, it was God who was faithful and provided for them. In fact, they never lacked anything. And it was God who was going to fulfill his promise to enter them into this land that he was going to give them. And so it's God who is the one who remembers even when we forget. Now, again, maybe it doesn't feel like that, right? Like maybe you're thinking, cool, but God, where are you? God, it sure doesn't feel like you remember me, and I don't blame you because I've forgotten you my whole life. So why would you have anything to do with me? So that question kind of lingers, right? Does God remember us? Or has he forgotten us, as if we're honest, as we deserve? Well, during his last week in ministry and on earth, Jesus in the New Testament is pictured as this greater Moses figure. And he's got his 12 disciples, his 12 followers, the new Israel, and he's going to give them instruction as well. And so we're going to be in Luke, if you want to follow along, Luke 22. We're going to go through quite a bit of scripture and not take too much time to kind of dig into it. So I want you to just hear this as well. Because I think here in this final week of Jesus' life, like we get proof that God has not forgotten us. So I'm going to pick it up, Luke 22, 19 through 20. And he, Jesus, took the bread, gave thanks and broke it, and gave it to them, saying, "This is my body given for you. Do this in remembrance of me." In the same way, after the supper, he took the cup, saying, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood, which is poured out for you." So like Moses, right, Jesus is saying, like, remember this. I'm about to do something, and I want you to reorient who you are around what I'm about to do. Like, remember this. And then later in that same meal, Jesus tells his disciples, they're like, oh, by the way, you're going to forget me. See, I'm about to be delivered over. I'm going to be crucified, and I'm going to rise again. But you guys are going to fall away. And his disciples are like, are you kidding me? Like, no way. We followed you this far. We'll never forget you. And so he says, especially to one that, if you guys read through the New Testament, is pretty much the one that's, his heart's in the right place, he would say. So Peter is always like, Lord, like, I will go with you even to death and to prison. And so Jesus says to him in verse 31, he's like, Simon, Simon, Satan has asked to sift all of you as wheat, but I have prayed for you, Simon, that your faith may not fail. And when you have turned back, strengthen your brothers. And here was his reply, Lord, I'm ready to go with you to prison and to death. And Jesus says, I tell you, Peter, before the rooster cries today, you will deny me 3 times that you know me. So Peter says, me, Lord, never. Like, I will remember you. Even if these 11 fall away, not I, Lord. I'll go with you to death. And then Jesus says, oh, Peter, you too are going to forget me. You'll forget me. And so later that night, Jesus gets arrested, and he's tried at night illegally, kind of in the secret of the night. And so Peter follows along closely, not too close, but he doesn't want to leave his Lord. And then in verse 54, it says, then seizing him, Jesus, they led him away and took him into the house of the high priest. And Peter followed at a distance. When some there had kindled a fire in the middle of the courtyard and had sat down together, Peter sat down with them. And a servant girl saw him seated in the firelight. She looked closely at him and said, this man was with him. But he denied it. Woman, I don't know him, he said. And a little later, someone else saw him and said, you are also one of them. Man, I am not, Peter replied. And about an hour later, another asserted, certainly this fellow was with him, was with Jesus, for he is a Galilean. And Peter replied, man, I don't know what you're talking about. Then the Lord turned and looked straight at Peter. And then Peter remembered the word that the Lord had spoken to him. Before the rooster crows today, you will disown me 3 times. And Peter went outside and wept bitterly. So after this meal that Jesus had with his disciples, and around a campfire, Peter sits down and he forgets Jesus 3 times. Just like Israel, just like Peter, we too forget. And so the question lingers, does God forget? What happens in the rest of the story? And so we move on, the story continues, and Jesus is tried, sentenced, crucified, and he hangs there on a cross between 2 criminals who are justly punished. And he's being mocked and beaten and ashamed. And it's on this place at the cross that we get to see the answer to our question, does God forget us? And so, Luke 23, starting in verse 41, we read this. So one of the criminals on Jesus' side mocks Jesus. He's like, can't you get yourself down? Like, if you are truly God, won't you do something about it? But the other criminal on the other side of Jesus rebukes that man. He says, don't you fear God? Since you are under the same sentence, we are punished justly, for we are getting what our deeds deserve. But this man, Jesus, he has done nothing wrong. And then he says, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And Jesus answered him, truly, I tell you, today you'll be with me in paradise. So in a desperate cry that echoes all of Israel, that echoes Peter and all of humanity, he cries out in a moment of complete desperation to God. He's like, even though I've forgotten you, Jesus, even though I'm lying here ashamed and justly punished, would you remember me? And then Jesus, turning to him, says, today you'll be with me in paradise. Like, I remember you, even though you forget, I remember you. Hanging there on a cross, naked, exposed, shamed before the God of the universe. Would you see yourself, too, as having nothing to offer? But would you also see yourself and cry out and see Jesus turn to you and say, today, I'll remember you. And while we were sinners, Christ died for us. But what about Peter? Peter just denied his Lord 3 times. Is that the end of Peter's story? Well, luckily, we get a little insight. So later, in the Gospel of John, the next gospel in the New Testament, see, Jesus had been crucified and he rose from the grave. That's the Easter story that we're going to celebrate in a couple weeks. But then he appeared to his disciples. And then a couple days later, Peter and some of the other disciples were out fishing. That's kind of their trade. That's what they did before Jesus called them to follow him. And so they're just kind of making a living, going back and fishing. And here we read of this encounter. So John 21, verse 4, it said, early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples did not realize that it was Jesus. He called out to them, friends, haven't you any fish? No, they answered. Like, who's this guy? But then the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, it's the Lord. And as soon as Simon Peter heard him say, it is the Lord, he wrapped his outer garments around him, jumped into the water. And then when they had landed, when they had come ashore with their boat, they saw a fire of burning coals there with fish on it and some bread. And Jesus said to them, bring some of the fish you caught. Let's come and have breakfast. Now, none of the disciples dared to ask him, who are you? For they knew it was the Lord. And Jesus came, took the bread, and gave it to them, and did the same with the fish. Now, again, after a meal, again around a campfire, Peter's here with Jesus. I can't help but wonder, what was Peter thinking, right? The last time that he had a meal with Jesus and that he was around a campfire, he denied him. He completely forgot who his God was. So maybe he's feeling a little ashamed right now. Maybe he's wondering, like, I hope Jesus doesn't bring this up. Like, I hope Jesus just kind of lets this slide. In verse 15, it says, when they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? He said, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. And Jesus said, feed my lambs. And again, Jesus said, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" And he answered, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." And Jesus said, "Take care of my sheep." And then a third time, he said, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" And Peter was hurt because Jesus, just for the third time, had asked him, "Do you love me?" He said, "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you." And he said, "Feed my sheep." Did you guys catch it? Like 3 times, Jesus was denied by Peter. He'd forgotten him. But then 3 times, Jesus reaffirms Peter. He said, "I have not forgotten you. Even though you've forgotten me, follow me, Peter." Oh, would you guys see the kindness of our God? When we forget him, he does not forget us. So we're gonna close today with communion. And so the first Sunday of every month at the Front Church is a special Sunday. In communion, some people call it the Eucharist, some people call it the Lord's Supper, but we get to join the church historic. For thousands of years, people have been taking the bread and the cup to remember Jesus. And we get to join the church global. Churches around the world on Sunday mornings do this, what we're about to do, to remember Jesus. And so we've got these little COVID-friendly cups, individual cups. They've got the wafer of bread on top, so you can peel that back. And then another layer below that is the cup. And we ask that if you guys follow Jesus, if you see him as your Lord and Savior and your King, feel free to take communion with us this morning. And if you're not ready, that's completely fine. And you see that this cup and this bread that Jesus said to do in remembrance of him, like, we don't believe it saves you. We don't believe that we're proving God something, that we're earning him. We're saying, "God, you see what I've done? You see how much I love you?" But instead, we do this to remember our God who doesn't forget, even when we do. And so the commands that God has given us in his word, in the Bible, and the story of how Jesus went to the cross for you, how he died and redeemed you, he purchased you back from death, and how in his resurrection he offers new life to anyone who would follow him. Like, these words are to be on your hearts. Tie them on your wrists and on your foreheads, and write them on your doorways as you go. Talk about them with your kids. Remember these words. So hear, O church, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And would you remember, would you love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength? And would you love your neighbor as yourself? So for those of us who follow Jesus, who are ready to take communion, you may do so at any point during these 3 songs of worship. And would you eat and drink in remembrance of our God? He hasn't forgotten you. We'll pray. God, we're in awe of who you are. Though we forget you over and over again, it was never really about us anyways. God, may we see ourselves with nothing to offer, and may we look at you and see you turn and say, "Today you will be with me in paradise." God, may we remember you, your words and your story, and may we orient our lives as a church. May we orient our church around you, God, and just show how thankful we are, God, that you haven't forgotten us. In your name, amen.